that we're going to see the resentment that white men vote differently than women or than non-white men, and some of it is a serious resentment over affirmative action and other programs that they look at this. Somebody on the blog commented that my family grew up, it's from the mountains of Tennessee. We had nothing. We didn't inherit anything. We were poor, but we don't get affirmative action. And she said, I'm past it, but I have relatives that aren't. And I know there used to be, in the 19th century, there was a coalition, the populist movement, did bring poor whites and poor blacks together to pursue their common interests. You think we'll ever get back to that, or is the resentment just too deep?
Well, let me, in the limited time I have to speak to affirmative action. We're having a political debate in this country right now over what, if anything, race still means. And the answer is complex. There is no question in my mind that race is still a factor in American life. Anyone who thinks that race doesn't affect every area of American life is missing some obvious signals and some obvious signs. Having said that, I do believe that Barack Obama's election has created a different kind of country. I think it's created a country that for the first time wants to wake up in the morning and move past race. Now, as I said, wants to wake up in the morning, I mean that we haven't gotten there yet. But we at least have made the progress of that being a new value in our society, people wanting to get past race. I think several years ago the value was that people recognized that we wouldn't get past it, so they wanted to create a kind of identity politics around it so that one side would prosper and one side might not. It's a good thing that today the country is striving to move toward a way of thinking about things where race is not this huge impediment, but striving means that the journey is ongoing. If affirmative action means an aggressive effort to admit African Americans to institutions that should be representative, then that is something that's still a necessity in our society. We're better off when schools are diverse than when they're not. We're better off when public institutions like fire departments and police departments are diverse than when they're not. And the Voting Rights Act is absolutely essential in my opinion. I am not for gutting or undermining or negating parts of the Voting Rights Act. The fact that we've made great progress in electing African Americans, and I think we're prepared to make greater progress in 2010 in this governor's election by electing me, that doesn't mean we don't need a strong Voting Rights Act. No one would argue that because theft is down that we need to eliminate laws against theft. No one would say that if we are successful in reducing political corruption that we need to celebrate by abolishing laws against corruption. So the notion that we've made so much progress, we need to end the regime which enables that progress, I don't understand that argument. We're just going to have to grapple with these questions of difference in American life, and that is in every area. Alabama is not California on gay rights. Alabama is not California on how we think about abortion and gender issues. We do have differences regionally in this country in terms of how we relate to our fellow neighbors and our fellow citizens. We've got to figure out, I think, how we build a sense of dialogue across lines of difference, and that's every way in which human beings are different from each other. But we do have to recognize that this is all a work in progress. And if we try, I don't want to say to push too far because that sounds wrong, but if we forget the fact that the democratic process with a small d is about values making their way through the community and being enacted by public policy, if we think it can be done solely by courts, if we think it can be done solely by dictating to people, I think that frankly we may end up more divided instead of less divided. So on all of these social questions, on all of these racial questions, or gender-based questions, or culture-based questions, we've got to figure out how do different people coexist with each other, recognizing that it ain't going to happen overnight, frankly. It's not going to be an easy, automatic kind of process. It certainly hasn't been with race, and it hasn't been with gender. So we've got to figure out what's the way to create opportunities for dialogue. And final point, how do we learn to respect people who think differently from us? It's very easy, and this is what I think the left and right tend to do. People on the left tend to think, if you don't agree with me, there's something wrong with your brain. People on the right tend to think, if you don't agree with me, there's something wrong with your conscience or your soul, your morality. And I think that's wrong. You know, we've got to learn how to say to people who disagree with us, you know what, I still respect your point of view. I just spoke to Boy State, and I spent a chunk of time talking to them about the importance of respecting opposing views. And that's a challenge, because I know when you're 18 and you're smart, you think you know everything, and you think you've thought everything through, and you can be 35 and 40 and think that way through, too. So I think that we've got to figure out, how do we learn how to respect differences? Some of my friends on the left every now and then have an issue with me because I talk about the importance of respecting the opinions of people who have intense faith, and whose faith, frankly, may lead them to what we may think of as being the right-wing side of a political argument. Regardless of what leads them there, it's still their faith and it's still their value scheme. And we've got to figure out how to dialogue with those people. I know Democrats do, because we need some of them to win elections. You know, Roy Moore announced for governor today, and Roy Moore has a particular theory of how he thinks faith affects public policy. Well, I have my own theory of how I think faith affects public policy, but I'm not prepared to say to people who believe what he believes that they don't have a place in the public sphere. I want to make sure that the public sphere is as broad as it possibly can be, and the challenge is that sometimes that means that ideas that may seem to be irreconcilable have to find a way to live and thrive together. So that's a big answer, you know, to a day in, day out problem that we have.
I have a quick race story that I swear is short. We took my daughter.
Now, she wouldn't believe me if I said it was
my
short.
daughter, it's 30 seconds. My daughter's 14. We took her out with my mother for Mother's Day. Of course, my idea of small talk is politics, so we were talking about the governor's race. And my mother was like, oh yes, I think Artur Davis is great. I'd vote for him, but nobody else will. It's like, why? Because he's black. He knows he's black. You don't have to whisper. And she says, but you know what I mean. In the meantime, Sarah, my daughter, is looking at her like she is just an idiot. And she says, what? And so my mother said, I'm from Morgan County. You don't understand. Sarah looked at her like Mommy said, nobody's going to vote for him because he wears socks. And she rolled her eyes and said, yeah, right. Nobody votes for the black guy. Tell that to Barack Obama. And it was like, snap! Why did I never hit my mother like that? You know? It was,
Well,
so I don't
you
think
dated
you
yourself by saying snap, by the way.
Yeah, I don't think you can underestimate the change that Obama is bringing, especially with 14,
right.
15, you know, kids that are just becoming conscious.
Well, I'll
of
say
what's
one
happening.
last thing about this, a little last thing I have time to say. What we're seeing in our polling is that Barack Obama is far more popular today than he was with white voters last November. Whenever somebody says to me, well, you know, I get everything about your campaign other than how you make up for the Obama 10% number, I always point out the one guarantee about this election: we are not going to get in a time capsule and run this election on November 4, 2008. Where Barack Obama was November 4, 2008 is not where Barack Obama is going to be next year, not where he is today. Different polls show different things. But right now, we show Barack Obama with a near 50% approval rating with white voters. AA, I think, shows it around 40. Survey USA doesn't poll cell phones, so I think they're always a little bit off, but they show, I think, we're in mid-30s. The bottom line is that Barack Obama had gotten 35, 40, 46% of the white vote in November. He would have gotten 46, 47% of the vote, and people would be saying, David, you'd be crazy if you did not run for governor. And would probably be unopposed to a Democratic nomination, frankly, if you put those numbers on the table. So let's challenge people, look at where we are now. That's the great thing about race relations. Where we are now will not be where we were yesterday. So if you're rooted in where we were yesterday, by definition, you're missing your capacity to see the growth that's happening around you. And that's the official the end, because I got to go to a speech in Montgomery.